Lutherans, right? Oh, yes.
Is threatening to block off the back. I don't know whether he will or not.
Right. I tried that for Saturday night and it didn't work. Well, and I think we tried roping it off and people just moved the ropes. I tried leaving the lights off in the back so people would have to come up front and they just complained it was dark. So. Right.
It's kind of silly.
Yeah.
I was so messed up Saturday. It's like, oh, I got to go to communion first. And then
Right.
usually count while they're out.
Right.
And I thought, Kelly said it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Huh?
I know it. There was no conversation.
We had a unit on academic listening.
Mm-hmm.
She said, oh, this is very nice. We can't all sit in the front. I said, trust me, there will be seats in the front.
Yeah. Yes.
They can grab the professor.
Yep.
They can develop a relationship with the professor and walk and talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they can hear better
Right?
and see better.
Yes, definitely. All righty, great. All right, good morning all and welcome to our Bible class for, what's today, September 22nd. And we're continuing going through Hebrews. That again begins with that idea in many and various ways God spoke to his people of old by the prophets, but now in these last days he's spoken to us by his Son. And so again, that's kind of how it begins, so kind of one of the overarching themes of what's going on. And after that short introduction, there's 4 sections. Again, last week we looked at how Jesus is greater than the angels and Jesus is greater than the Torah in chapters 1 and 2. This week again, we'll look at how Jesus is greater than Moses and the Promised Land. Then, depending on how long it takes us on that, chapters 5 through 7 are how Jesus is great high priest and greater than Melchizedek, and then greater than the sacrifices and the covenant. Hebrews 11, of course, is that great heroes of the faith chapter, and then the next chapters after that remind us of the importance of enduring, and some closing remarks. So again, Jesus is greater than Moses and the Promised Land in these chapters we're getting into today, 3 and 4. And we're also going to spend some time as we go through looking back at a couple of the stories of the incidences that happened in the Old Testament that the author of the Hebrew is at least alluding to kind of remind us of what happened in the Exodus and how the people reacted, and why that either serves as a good example or a bad example to the people that this Hebrews is written to. All right, and could someone read Hebrews 3? We'll start, and I think we're looking at the first 6 verses here.
Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who is faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses also is faithful in all of God's house. For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope.
All right, very good. All right, so again, Jesus, comparing Jesus with Moses, what did you notice was happening there?
Jesus was higher than Moses.
Jesus is greater than Moses, right? And so again, if this is to the Hebrews, to a group of Jewish Christians, they'd hold Moses in very high esteem. You know, Moses is one of the great heroes of the faith. I mean, heck, we've even got a stained glass picture of him up front here. So he's very, and so if Jesus is greater than Moses, then that's saying something, right? Anything else?
Well, there's the difference because Moses was not God's son.
Right.
So he was a human being who was following the direction of God.
Right.
While Jesus was fulfilling God's purpose
Right.
as a son.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll see that. Yeah, Moses was called by God, had a mission by God. Served as God's representative, as the intercessor between God and the people and God. But not in a way, and we'll get to it later, is that Jesus does so in a greater way because he's the Son. And so, and we'll touch on too, there's that difference between son and servant that even Jesus alludes to in John 8. The son always has a place in the house, the servant doesn't, and that kind of thing. But good, yeah. So both Jesus and Moses were faithful to God and to God's call, but Moses was faithful as a slave or servant, while Jesus was faithful as a son. So again, that son aspect gives him a different idea, different connection to God, greater connection to God, and is important to know. All right. Again, in the culture of that day, servant could be a steward who'd proved himself trustworthy. He'd be entrusted with running his master's entire household. See a few examples of that probably in the Bible. Joseph is one of the best examples where, even though he's a slave, Potiphar basically turns over the running of his household to Joseph. And then we see kind of too, even later when Pharaoh turns over, makes Joseph Pharaoh's number 2 in Egypt. So servants and slaves could have higher positions, but you still always had that tenuous, well, you're just a servant, not the son. Slave's not a son, not an heir who could share his inheritance. Thus, it's better to know the son than to know the most honored slave or servant. Again, why does the author of Hebrews make the point that Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses?
Because Moses was the one that they all looked up to.
Again, they're all looking up to Moses. Moses is the one who's called by God, who leads the people out of slavery in Egypt to the promised land, does all these miracles, and is the one who's the intercessor between the people and God. So Moses does a lot of great things, and so he's looked up to and highly esteemed. But of course, if Jesus can do some of that even more and even greater, yeah.
In the Old Testament, in all of the discourse between God and Moses, I think, wasn't there some place in the Old Testament where God said to Moses, "And someone greater than you will come"?
Yeah.
God never talks to Moses and mentions Jesus by name, but isn't there some place in that discourse where God says something that the theologians think is referring to Jesus?
Yeah, and I want to say it's Deuteronomy, but yeah, there's going to be a prophet greater than Moses that will get raised up. One of the reasons that gets mentioned is because Muslims point that to meaning Muhammad, but of course, we know that's pointing to Jesus, not Muhammad. But yeah, so that idea that there's as great as Moses was, there's someone greater than Moses who's going to come. And so again, yeah, that prediction would be in the Old Testament. The Hebrews would know it, and so saying, "Hey, Jesus is the one greater than Moses," that making that connection would have been important. Yeah, very good. All right. Again, what evidence do we find that Jesus is superior to Moses, and can you think of anything else?
Well, one thing that he's greater than Moses, Jesus is that Jesus rises from the dead.
Right. Yeah. So
Moses is still dead.
right. Yeah, so Jesus is raised from the dead, and has a long extended time of that. Moses dies. He appears, with Jesus on the Transfiguration Mountain, but not beyond that. And so we know, Moses is dead, and Jesus is raised from the dead. So that's certainly a aspect of being greater. Yes. Yeah. What?
He's the Son of God.
Jesus is, like we talked about, Jesus is the Son, not just a servant. So that places him in a different way. And especially, we talk about how Moses is the intercessor between God and the people, but Jesus can do that in a better way because he's both God and man. And so he's got a foot in both worlds, so to speak, and can be a better intercessor than Moses, who's trying to think like God, but can't quite get there because he's only human. Yeah, good. All right, yeah, so that Christ is superior to Moses in his person is an obvious fact. Moses is a mere man called to be a prophet and leader, while Jesus Christ is the Son of God sent by the Father into the world. Moses is also, could be seen, we talk more about his titles as prophet and lawgiver, but we could consider him an apostle, because an apostle is someone who is sent, especially sent with a commission or sent on a mission. And Moses is sent out by God, at the burning bush. Okay, you're sent to go back to Egypt to go find the people, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. But Jesus, of course, is the last word to sinful men. All right, what's significant about that distinction if you were to talk about being sent with a commission versus sent as God's kind of last word? And I think some of that we've gotten into already.
Well, we've been sent with a commission, but we're certainly not God.
Right, yeah, we've been sent with a commission, we're certainly not God. Yep, good. Anything else? All right, and then let me scroll back a little bit there. All right, so the attitude in verse 6, Christ is faithful as over God's house as a son, and we are his house if we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. So what's that attitude described there? What attitude are we supposed to have? Confidence. Yeah. Confidence, trust, hope in God. And as we'll see as we go through some of these stories that are getting alluded to, the Israelites were not always confident in what God was doing for them, or not always trusting that God was doing what was best for them. All right. And what's the blessing given to those who had confidence in God, and how does that help us today? Eternal life, yeah. All right, well, let's review some of those Exodus events that are going on. And so here, we'll start with this one, Exodus 17. This is fairly early on, but then it's also something that gets echoed, repeated later on. Could someone read this for us?
All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not?
All right. So, what happens here in Exodus 17? Are the people confident that God's going to give them what they need? No.
Now it says in this portion that it was the elders who saw it happen. Did the people afterwards have have the blessing of the water?
Yeah, I mean, eventually they get the water. The elders are
It's just that these
there to watch Moses do it and be able to spread the word that it's God gave them the water through Moses.
Is this where Moses strikes the rock instead of touching it?
That's the next section, but. All right. So again, and this is fairly early on. Again, Exodus 17. So they've made it out of Egypt, out on the Exodus, and so they've seen all that God has done for them. But now they're kind of getting into now we're not in Egypt anymore. What's this look like? And finding out that how reality is. And that doesn't always match up with their expectations, and so that creates challenges for them. All right, and then the same idea, similar story happens in Numbers 20. And can someone read this for us?
Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron together gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy.
All right. So how does Moses' sin here help kind of strengthen the argument of Hebrews that stick with Jesus instead of going back to Moses and Judaism? So at least, again, part of what seems to be going on is that the people who are reading first hearers of the book of Hebrews are undergoing persecution. There's at least some temptation for them to go back to back to Judaism instead of following Jesus. And so what's the difference here? What's going on? Why would remembering about Moses and how he messed up make a difference for how they remember Moses versus how trusting in Jesus?
That reveals Moses' temptation into sin as a sinner.
Right. Yeah. So we know Moses is not perfect, and this is obviously kind of the big thing that he despite everything that he does, he'll get to see the promised land but not enter it. He'll get to go up on the mountain and look over it and see the promised land, but he won't be able to enter it. Yeah.
So was Moses not trusting in Jesus either? He kept praying. So I didn't see where he's at fault, so to speak.
Well, so God told Moses, speak to the rock, and Moses hit it instead, seemingly out of frustration. So he's not following God's command of how to handle this. And so that seems to be the last straw for then why he doesn't get to enter the promised land.
He's doing what worked before.
Right, he's doing what worked before instead of trusting that God will work in this new way of, well, talk to the rock, and it'll get water.
Because fed up with the grumpy people.
Right, fed up with the grumpy people. Yeah, the stubborn and stiff-necked people. We find that a few times. Yeah. All right. And then the other thing, so those were examples of Moses and the people quarreling. But then the other example is that God has this promised land that He's going to give the people, but then the people decide. In this story tells us that they decide they don't want to go in, and that's part of why the people wander for 40 years. That's going to be something else that Hebrews touches on. So, could someone read this for us? And I took out the list of names of all of the 12 spies, so we don't have to stumble over those. But all right, can someone read this for us?
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into the Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehab near Lebo-Hamath. They went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch from the single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt."
All right.
Okay.
So because of this, then all the people of Israel over the age of 20 were to die in the wilderness and never enter the promised land. But Caleb and Joshua, so two of the 12 spies, believe God, and God honors their faith. So again, what was the report? What did they see when they spied out the promised land?
The produce was fabulous.
Produce was fabulous, right? If you've got a cluster of grapes that has to be carried on poles between two people, this was probably a pretty big cluster.
But the people that lived there were big and mean. And
Right, but there's big mean people there in big fortified cities, and so they're scared of that. So they can see it's a bountiful land, but the people who are there are frightening, and so they don't think they can get into it. But Caleb and Joshua trust God. God said he's going to give them that land. They say, well, if God says we can do this, we'll do it. But the people doubt and want to try and rebel against Moses, get someone to take them back to Egypt. And so again, that's why they don't get to enter the promised land. And so those are, any other thoughts or comments on that?
One thing I think it definitely emphasizes that God had his word and have that faith. That's what we cling to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an example for all of us.
Yeah, so the confidence trust example of that, just like Joshua and Caleb trusted God, that even though the challenges looked great, that God would be with them and they'd be able to meet the challenges. So too we can trust.
You know, I can sort of understand their fear. They kind of looked around. We don't have swords. We don't have horses. We don't, you know. These are big guys in fortified cities and armies. You're sending us in there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Israelites have. Yeah. I mean, the Israelites certainly have some weapons, but yeah, they're certainly not as strong as these other groups look. Definitely. Yeah. You know that if we feel like grasshoppers next to these giants that we saw, we should probably not try and fight them. Yeah.
Really that big, or were they exaggerating?
There's some debate. I mean, if you remember the Nephilim are the giants before the flood, and so these are somehow similar to that. And you know, later on, of course, we get Goliath and people. So I mean, I think they were big, but not not everyone was big. But there's there are some very, very big soldier warriors that they didn't want to deal with. There were fortified cities they didn't think they could handle. And there were a lot of people. This wasn't just a uninhabited land anymore. You know, when Abraham and Isaac and Jacob had lived there, there were people there, but it wasn't quite this bad. But now they've been gone for 400 years, so other people were there and had time to build things up. All right, so that's kind of what we need to have in the back of our mind as we're hearing in this next section of Hebrews, as we're talking about the people of God and getting into the promised land and the rest that they have while they're there. All right, could someone read this for us, please?
Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in rebellion, on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was provoked with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brothers, lest there be any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end.
All right. So, what does it mean to have a hard heart?
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing, okay, yeah.
Doubting,
So, what?
doubting,
Doubting, okay, yeah. Anything else?
Fear.
Fear?
Not listening.
Not listening? All right, what leads to a hard heart? And some of those things too, but if you're doubting, if you're afraid, can lead to a hard heart. Anything else? What else leads to a hard heart?
That you don't listen anymore.
Yeah, not listening, okay. All right, what are the dangers of developing a hard heart? Yeah.
That you're not open to God's promise.
Not open to God's promises. Yeah. All right. So again, when the author of the Hebrews is writing to people there, some part of why they're doubting, part of why they struggle a little bit is because they see this Christianity as almost a sort of an innovation, that this is something new and different compared to what they've been in. For us, though, sometimes we doubt, we struggle in our faith. Well, it's not because it's new, but because it's old and it's seen as out of date. Why do some people see the Christian faith as old-fashioned? What?
It's easy.
It's easy, okay, easy to do that, yeah. Okay, anything else?
Because it doesn't base itself on individuals' ability to save themselves,
Okay, they focus on their individual abilities and not other
which
things?
is, kind of the way people believe now.
Yeah.
Do-it-yourself religion.
Mhm. Anything else?
You don't need that.
Yeah, we don't need that. That's, again, something old-fashioned that we used to need, but now we've advanced past that. We don't need to deal with that. We used to have to pray for rain. Now we know how rain comes, so we don't need religion anymore. That kind of thing. All right. All right. What is that passage we just heard tell us about to those who have doubts about Christ, either because he's new or because he's old? All right, and that might not be a super good question. I think at least part of what's going on is, again, the focus on the present, on as long as it's today, the day is today, now is the acceptable time, now is the day of salvation. If we get too caught up in either the past or the future about what has happened or what could happen, and not as much in the present, then that's, again, one of those times when we tend to doubt, because we just see we can focus on what went wrong in the past or what could go wrong in the future, and not on how God's with us in the present. All right, any other thoughts on again, exhorting ourselves, being exhorted as long as it's today.
I think it also tells us how important it is to remain in fellowship with all other believers,
Right.
because they can build you up when you're kind of faltering.
Yeah. Yeah, and that'll come up later on too. Yes. Right. Yeah, that idea being,
Have that, you know.
yeah, that it's not an individual thing. You're supposed to be gathering together with other believers for support and encouragement, and that'll get mentioned throughout Hebrews 2, the importance of gathering together. And we've got a lot of the something we miss because we only have 1 second. We only talk about you usually in English, a second person. We don't talk about y'all or all y'all that often up north. But a lot of times in the Hebrew and the Greek, it's more of a collective second person. And that when there's a you, it's meaning everyone, not just an individual person. And we see, that this is God talking to the assembly. Moses gets picked out, but then it's Moses talking to the assembly, to the congregation of the people of Israel, not necessarily an individual thing. So that's important too. All right. Let's, I think, finish up chapter 3, see how this goes. All right, could someone read this for us?
Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell into the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the word. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage he said, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today saying through David so long afterward in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him, to whom we must give account.
All right. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Any thoughts, reactions, comments to that? So looking back at, so there were the people disobeyed God, so they didn't get to enter the promised land and enter into the rest that God had said he would give them because they were just disobedient. And now that same warning's coming to the Hebrews to be encouraged, be supported, but not, so that the same thing doesn't happen to them. Okay? So, and again, at least part of it is that, these aren't people who don't know God at all. These are the people who had seen all of the 10 plagues and seen and walked across the Red Sea on dry ground and seen, the fire on Mount Sinai and been led by the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. It's not that they hadn't seen miracles and hadn't seen what God had done or would do for them. They saw all that and still disobeyed. And so recognizing that if they could see all these things and then disobey, then what's to say, you need to pay better attention as well. All right, any other thoughts?
Now, the Israelites got there because Joseph invited his family to come to Egypt. Right. That's how they got there in the first place.
So again, they get to Egypt in the first place because after Joseph's sold into slavery because he told his brothers that he had dreams, they were all bow down to him, and his brothers didn't like that. He gets sold into slavery and sent to Egypt, goes through ups and downs, and eventually gets appointed Pharaoh's number 2. Pharaoh has dreams that there's going to be famine, years of plenty and then years of famine. Joseph says, well, this is what it means. So store up lots during the years of plenty so then you can make it through the years of famine. So then Egypt has plenty, so during the famine, then Jacob sends his sons to Egypt. They don't know who Joseph is at first, and eventually they figure it out. Joseph forgives them, and they all come to Egypt because, again, Joseph's Pharaoh's number 2. So this is probably a good place for them. They get the land of Goshen and get to be shepherds there and things, and everything's hunky-dory. But then they're there for 400 years, and eventually they get a Pharaoh that doesn't remember Joseph or anything, one of those dynastic changes that happened, and so then the Israelites are enslaved. And then God hears their cries and raises up Moses to save them and bring them back to the land that he'd promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That again, land flowing with milk and honey, lots of good stuff there, but giants in the land, big armies and things too, which are scary, and so the people don't trust in God to deal with those challenges, and so they want to go back and are afraid. All right, do I have any other? Yeah, so again, the Hebrews now gives a second call to action. Don't harden your hearts. Entire history of Moses leading Israel across the wilderness is filled with the rebellion against God, disobedience to Moses, and sin. Hardness of heart didn't end then even after Joshua brings the people into the promised land, because again, the law can't deliver us from our sin, only the gospel can do that. All right. And we've talked about some ways that we harden our hearts today. All right. Any final thoughts? I think we'll wrap up a little early so the brass can go, and we started a little early too. And then because this is kind of a good breaking point, and then we'll get into the rest of chapter 4, and then chapter 5 gets us into that Jesus as high priest stuff. So, all right. Any final thoughts, questions, comments? All righty. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next week.